record. So specifically, I want to give you a sample today of something that really every page of the Talmud has, and that is, I'm just going to share the page of the Talmud that we're talking about in Hebrew, just to give you a visual. So I'm looking at, this is, let's see if we can get it smaller. Let me get this thing smaller. Let's undo it, and then I'll try to get it smaller. Why is it so big? Okay, so this is a little bit better. Let me share the screen. So this is the way the Talmud, the page of Talmud looks in Hebrew. So it's a pretty long page, and it's quite exciting. There's a lot of things going on here. So the center is the Talmud, the text of the Talmud, center of the page, the middle column, the middle, and it's surrounded by commentary. And the left side, really the inner side, because it's really two pages, one next to the other. So the inner side, this is Rashi's commentary. And Rashi is sort of short commentary. It gives you 2 words of the Talmud, and then a sentence of commentary. 3 words of the Talmud, a sentence of commentary. Some of them are longer, but that's the way he goes. And this is Rashi. Rashi lived in the, was it the 12th century? And he became the most used commentary on Talmud because he helps you read it, he helps you get by the page. And you can't read Talmud without Rashi, really. Then on the outer side of the page, here you have what they call Tosafot. Tosafot means addition. And it's additional commentary by a group of sages from the countries of Ashkenaz. So that is France and Germany. And most of them are Rashi's children, grandchildren, well, sons-in-law, grandchildren, and their schools. And here they have commentary, and the commentaries get a little longer, right? Instead of just 1 line or 2 lines, the commentaries become longer, and some of them get much longer. And what they do is really they analyze the Talmud, not just what is the Talmudic text saying right here, but how do you square it with possible contradictions from other places in the Talmud? And it's a deeper level of analysis. And it's obviously takes more time to get into, but hopefully today, if we have time, we'll get into one of those commentaries of the Tosafot, the additional commentaries, because this is a question. This is a good opportunity. This law that we're going to study is a good opportunity to raise a question from Tosafot, and the possible solution. Solution may or may not be a good one. In other words, we may or may not like it, but it's just the process of thinking and analyzing I think is very interesting. Okay, let's go back to our subject. That's just an introduction. What is our subject? Our subject is dispute between employer and employee. And we basically have 2 disputes. The first dispute was where the employer says to the employee, "I've paid you." Comes the end of the day, I'm the employer, I come to you, I say, "Please pay me for the day. I'm a day laborer." It may be significant, we'll see later. Please pay me for the day. The homeowner says, "I paid you already." The laborer says, "I've not been paid." So what do you do when you have a dispute? So if you follow the conventional laws of the conventional laws of claims, the employee, the laborer, should not get anything. Why? Because the number 1 rule about monetary law, the number 1 rule is, in Hebrew, "Hamotzim chavero alav haraya." If you want to extract money from your fellow, the burden of proof is upon you. The laborer wants to extract money from the homeowner. He has to prove that he wasn't paid. Can't prove you weren't paid. In other words, if there's no evidence, the money stays where it is. The money stays in his possession. So if you just follow the conventional laws of claims, the the laborer has no claim. I can't prove his claim, so he doesn't get the money. That's the convention. That's if you follow the conventional laws. However, the Talmud says that in this case we make an exception. Sages make an exception, and the sages say, "Believe the laborer." Why believe the laborer? So it basically boils down. There's a whole dance back and forth. In other words, a whole discussion back and forth. Why would you believe one over the other? It basically boils down to the point where it's really a twofold thing. The homeowner is running a business. He has a lot to remember. He has a lot on his head. So it's it's possible that he forgot. Whereas the laborer is only here for the payment. He only has one motivation for being here. He has to get paid. And if he didn't get paid, he would remember. So assuming that one of them made a mistake, we would assume the one making a mistake is the homeowner who's got a lot to balance, as opposed to the employer. And therefore, in this case, we say, instead of following the regular laws of claims, which would mean the laborer gets nothing because he has no proof. Here we'll say the laborer could get paid. He has to take an oath that he was not paid. That was what we studied last time, about 7 weeks ago. So I'm sure we remember, it's only been 7 weeks. That's what we studied 7 weeks ago. And of course, there are details. And everything is in the details. It's not when it works, when it doesn't apply, when it doesn't apply. And here's an example where you have this beautiful principle, but we also have to square this with other Talmudic principles. And therefore, we're going to narrow the cases where this enactment to benefit the laborer when it applies, because we have to still consider other Talmudic principles, and therefore this interpretation, which this enactment that the Talmud says we want to help the laborer for whatever reason, because we assume that the other one that the homeowner made the mistake, and this guy needs the money. We're going to limit with the application of this because of other Talmudic principles. So that's just to get us up to speed about what we discussed last time. By the way, we mentioned it last time also, that later we'll discuss the case if there's a dispute of how much the wage was agreed upon. In other words, the homeowner agrees that he didn't pay. The laborer agrees that he was not paid. But the laborer says, "You promised me $5." And the homeowner says, "I promised you $3." In this case, you believe the homeowner, the employer, because the employer certainly knows what he would promise, because it's critical for his business model, and we don't assume he made the mistake. So we fall back on the regular rule, which is if you want to extract money from somebody else, in this case, if the laborer wants to extract money from the homeowner, the burden of proof is upon the laborer. If he can't prove it, you believe the homeowner. So that's sort of the balance, right? So far, so good. Everybody's happy? So somewhat happy? Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to introduce a Talmudic concept that you may have heard before, because it's mentioned in many, many areas in the Talmud, and it's been discussed for about 1,500 years, and there's many layers of analysis. What exactly is the mechanism of this Talmudic principle? But it certainly is a Talmudic principle, and we studied it before, so you heard about it. The issue here is something called migoy, which is Aramaic, and migoy means because. And it works something like this. The idea is, if somebody makes a claim, you should believe him. Why should you believe him? Because if he was lying, he could have had a much better lie. That's essentially the logic. Now, once you analyze this, is it circular logic? Is it not circular? That's another whole discussion. But let's stay simple for a second, right? The logic is, if you believe me because if I was lying, I would have a better lie. So that's why you believe. Okay, so that's a Talmudic principle, which applies to some cases, not always, but in some cases it works, some cases it doesn't. It has its limitations, like every other Talmudic principle. Okay, let's try to apply it to this case. Says the Talmud, and Maimonides follows and qualifies and codifies it in this way. Let's assume I'm the laborer. Let's assume you are the homeowner, you're the employer. Everything I said till now in the last 15 minutes applies if there is proof, if there are witnesses or proof that you hired me. So there's proof that I was hired. The only question is, was I paid or not paid? Okay, what happens if there's a scenario? Put on your legal hat for a second. What happens if there's a scenario where I'm the laborer? I come to you at the end of the day, and I say, I worked for you today, please pay me. You say, I paid you already. I say, please pay me. The problem here for me is that I have no proof that you hired me. Okay? So now, if you follow the principle of Migai, the logic of Migai, you have to say something like this. Believe the homeowner. When the homeowner says, I paid you, because if the homeowner wants to lie, the homeowner could have said, I never hired you to begin with. Okay? So now the homeowner is honest. If the homeowner was lying, if the homeowner, the employer, is lying, and he thought, and he has not paid, and he did not pay, and he's lying and he said he paid, if he's such a liar, he had a better lie. He could have said, sorry, I have no idea who you are. I never hired you. So now that he acknowledges, I did hire you, I do owe you money, but I happen to pay you, now the principle of Migai falls into place. And therefore, both the Talmud and Maimonides say that if it's a case where the person was hired, the laborer was hired without witnesses, so there's no proof that I was hired, and then we have the same dispute of whether or not I was paid, in that case, you believe the homeowner. Because if the homeowner is lying, you could have said, I never hired you. And that's the principle of Migai. So we'll read it inside. And that's what I said, we're going to bring in the Tosafos because it's very interesting, because there's layers in this question of Migai and how the Migai applies here. So it's very exciting. But let's first go to the Talmud, to the Maimonides. It's a little easier Maimonides. We'll read it inside. We'll review a little bit what we said last time, and we'll read this new section inside here, and then maybe we'll go a deeper layer. If everybody's happy so far, we'll go a deeper layer. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to read the first three paragraphs of 6. The following rules apply. When a worker who was hired in the presence of witnesses. Okay, so that you see, my manager right in the beginning, he already tells you which case we're talking about. We're talking about if the homeowner hires a laborer, but there are witnesses that he was hired. So I was a worker, I was hired in the presence of witnesses, and I demand payment from his employer at the appointed time. The owner claims to have paid the wages, and the worker claims not to have received it. So like I said, if you follow the standard laws of evidence, what happens? The standard laws of claims, the laborer should get nothing because he has no proof. And the law is, if I want to extract money from somebody else, I have to bring proof. So the standard case with the standard law would be the laborer gets nothing. However, Maimonides quotes the Talmud and says, our sages ordained that while holding a sacred object, which is a type of oath, the worker should take an oath that he did not receive his wage. In other words, it's a severe form of an oath. Make him hold a Torah scroll while he takes the oath. That's a very severe form of oath, which we don't always employ. But in this case, because the employer is actually the employee, the laborer wants to take out money from somebody else, he's going to have to take an oath holding a sacred object, holding a Torah. He may then collect it according to the laws governing all those who take oaths and then collect their due. Okay, fine. The rationale for this ruling is that the employer is busy managing his workers and the worker is pining his soul on his wage. Very poetic, pining his soul. The whole day he's thirsting for his wage. He needs the money. And therefore he's thinking about the wage the whole day. He didn't forget that he got paid. Maybe he's lying, but he didn't forget, right? The employer, could be the employer forgot. He's got a lot on his head. Even if the worker is a minor, not meaning not a legal adult, so he's less than 13. The worker may take an oath and collect his wage, which is unusual because usually the minor has less child. His claims has less weight because they don't have the maturity to understand what's really happening here. But in this case, I guess there was no laws against child labor. So if the child is working at the end of the day and he claims he wasn't paid and the boss says, I paid you, who are you going to believe? A 12-year-old kid or the boss? Well, you're going to believe the kid because the kid really needs the money and he did not forget whether he got it. The owner may have forgotten. Okay, fine. That is everything fine. If you like if you buy into this idea that you want to protect the laborer, this will make you very happy. However, paragraph number 3 is going to somewhat limit this law to cases where there's no migoy. In other words, it was already laid out to us earlier that we're talking about specifically a case where the employer was where the laborer was hired with witnesses. And why did we say that? Because now we're going to see what happens if there's no witnesses. If there's no witnesses, then although the rabbis really, really want to help this laborer, but they can't go against the migoy. What's the migoy? Believe the owner, because if the owner was lying, he could have had a better lie. Different rules apply when the employer hired the worker without witnesses observing. And here comes your migoy. Since the employer could say, such a thing never happened, I never hired you, right? If I come up to you and I say, please pay me for the day. You say, sorry, I have no idea who you are. I never hired you. And if I say I never hired you, the sages would not allow you to take an oath and get paid, because that only works if we both agree that I hired you, right? Because if just I walk up to a stranger and say, pay me for the day, sorry, you have no evidence that I hired you, have a nice day. We don't say you can get paid if you take an oath because the owner is busy. That only applies if we know that there was an established relationship between the two. But if I deny that I hired you and you have no proof, I don't have to pay, and you can't take an oath and get paid. So if in a case where there were no witnesses that the laborer was hired, so since the employer could have said, I never hired you, so now we accept his claim when he says, I hired you and I paid you. Hence, the employer must take a shvuah testet if he denies owing anything to the worker, or a scriptural oath if he admits. Okay, let's leave that alone. Here it flips. Here the owner takes an oath that he doesn't have to pay, and he doesn't have to pay. That's enough. Okay, fine. That is the standard law. In other words, we have the standard law, which is if you want to extract money, you have to bring proof. We have the unique enactment that the sages enacted for the benefit of the laborer, and we said that if there are witnesses that you were hired, and now there's a dispute whether you were paid, the laborer to take an oath, holding a Torah scroll, which is a very severe thing. You hold the Torah scroll, take an oath, and you can extract payments because the owner is distracted. The employer really, his soul is pining, his soul is yearning for the money. He didn't forget about it, and therefore we say you can have it with an oath. So that was last week. And then this week we're adding that the concept of migoy. If the employer could have claimed that he never hired me because there were no witnesses, and he didn't claim that. Instead, he admitted that he hired me, but he claimed that he paid me. Now you have no choice. You have to believe him, because if he's a liar, he could have had a better lie. So this is an idea. If you like this so far, then we could continue. If not, bring it on. Let's go. Go ahead, Vicky.
Well, I like it so far. Everything seems logical. I just had a question. First of all, did everybody study the law? And the second of all, the conversation, does it happen in court?
Okay, the first question is an interesting question because I'm afraid of your follow-up question. Let's assume everyone knows. Let's assume everyone knows the law. So Vicky says the logic doesn't work anymore. Let's assume everyone knows the law. Let's assume everyone knows it. So Vicky's going to ask now, what's your next question? So could you really prove that once everyone knows about the migoy, could the migoy be manipulated? Well,
that too, but also the concept that everybody has to be on the level that they're capable of studying and understanding the law.
if they don't know the migoy is even better. If the people don't know about the logic of migoy, then it works even better.
Right.
Because they're going to come to court, and that just means the guy is more believable. If the guy doesn't know this thing and he's admitting that he hired you, the guy's admitting he hired me, he doesn't have to admit it. That makes his position more believable. So that if he doesn't know it, it for sure works. The question is, what happens if he does know? So if you want to go into migoy, we can go into migoy. I'm only resisting a little bit. If you just push a little bit more, you may break my resistance. But that's a subject in itself. That's migoy. The point, there's two ways of studying migoy. One, let's stay simple for now, unless we want a little bit more.
But the conversation happens in court, right?
The conversation will happen between the two, but eventually it comes to court. Yes, the court is going to say you got to take an oath. Yeah, yes, the court is going to have to define. The question is what happened. There's a separate question of all these matters. In America, if I want to sue you, I just sue you, and then I don't say anything. I just say, let's talk in court, right? The question is if I make a certain claim out of court and I come into court and I make a different claim. So that's a separate discussion, right? That's a separate discussion of how much weight my statements out of court have versus my statements in court. Could I explain? Could I retract? That's a separate discussion. That will come to the laws of witnesses and the laws of testimony. That's beyond the scope. But assuming
the Torah holding happens in court.
Yes.
It doesn't happen like you're in a regular scenario between
right. Yeah. Only the court will impose the oath, and they warn the person about the severity of the oath, etc., and then they'll do it. Okay, now here is where I love Tosafos. What's going to happen? I'm just going to show you an example. We have a beautiful discussion. Everyone has the migoy, and everybody's fine. Everyone's happy. Maimonides rules. It's all good. And then Tosafos, Rashi's grandchildren, they get up and they say, "1 second, this whole thing makes no sense." And they basically pop a bubble in the whole migoy thing. They say migoy doesn't apply here. So what's the Talmud telling me about migoy? Migoy does not work here. It's a very narrow, very innocent looking Tosafos. It's not very big, but he drops a bomb of a question, right? So it's right here. It's just this big. It's not that big. This is the size, and these few lines, he drops a bomb on the whole thing. It's actually so beautiful how the question is so powerful. The answer is okay. I'm not saying the answer is bad, but the question, sometimes they say the question is better than the answer, but the question here is absolutely great. It's just like beautiful. By the way, if you know Hebrew, you realize that in this version of the Talmud, both Rashi and Tosafot, the letters are a little bit different than the Hebrew letters. That the font is a little bit different. They call it Rashi letters just because when the print was invented, they didn't have sophisticated ways of making different font sizes. So to differentiate between Rashi and the Talmud, they created a new font for Rashi, but instead of making new fonts, they created new letters. So therefore, it got the name Rashi letters, even though Rashi never saw those letters because it was invented with the print, and Rashi lived a few hundred years before the printing press. And also it wasn't just used for Rashi, but because the first time it was used was for Rashi, for the Chumash, for the Bible and Rashi, so it gets the name Rashi print. In this version, both Tosafot and Rashi, both are written in this Rashi print, Rashi font, Rashi letters really. And now there are a lot of Talmuds that go back and put regular Hebrew instead of Rashi Hebrew. That's just interesting. So for example, Shin. If you look at my cursor here, this is a shin. A shin has a base and has three things protruding, three branches protruding upward. That's the Hebrew shin. The Rashi shin looks nothing like that. Rashi shin is right here, what I'm highlighting right now. It's just a shin. It just looks nothing like it. But again, it was just a printer. If you don't like the fonts, speak to the printer. I mean, I don't mean the printed today. I mean, the first time they printed it is, I think it's one of the first books ever printed was Rashi on in the Bible. But in any case, that's just by just an aside. Now I want to get to the question how Tosafos shows up and punches a hole in this whole thing. It's unbelievable that in some sense I'm like embarrassed that I didn't come up with this question alone. It's so simple. So let's get into Tosafos' question. Premise of the Migoy is, if I'm lying, I could have said a better lie. That's the premise of Migoy. So believe me, because if I'm lying, I could have said a better lie. So believe me that I'm being honest and I'm not lying. That's the Migoy. And that works for almost 99.9% of the Migoys. It all works. It's all fine and good. Tosafos says, how are you bringing a Migoy into our discussion? Our discussion has nothing to do with lying. What is the Talmud saying? The Talmud is assuming that the employer, the homeowner, is so busy that he forgot whether he paid. If he forgot whether he paid, what are you saying? I have a migoy that the employer is trustworthy because if he wants to lie, he would say a better lie. Nobody accused him of lying. We accused him of forgetting. So how does the migoy work? So I just sat there for a half an hour talking about a migoy. Tosafos says, remember, Tosafos is 1,000 years, almost, what is it? It's 600 years after the Talmud was written. And he says, what are you people talking about? Migoy does not apply here. It's not a question of trustworthiness, which is what usually Migoy is. Migoy says, if the employee was a liar, if the employer was a liar, he would have said, I never hired you to begin with. So it must be that you're honest. Nobody said you're not honest. What we're saying is you have a big business to run and you forgot whether or not you paid employer number 603. So what is the proof that you wouldn't lie? How does that prove anything that you're saying the truth? How does that prove? I'm sorry, it proves that you're saying the truth, your truth. How does it prove that you did not make a mistake and you did not forget? Now, this, ladies and gentlemen, is a nice question. Okay? This is worth to get together just to read the question, even though you don't have the answer. It just means that somebody was thinking when they studied the Talmud. I wasn't, but somebody was. So that's good. So that's why it's comforting to know that at least somebody read this Talmud and someone thought about it and asked the hard questions. The good news is there's also an answer. I'm not sure the answer is as good as the question, but there's also an answer. So we'll get to that. But that's Tosafos. Now, Tosafos, what Tosafos does, he brings in another scenario, another migoy. I don't know if we should go there. If you're ready, if you want to go somewhere else, another discussion, it's actually a fascinating case. But Tosafos proves from another piece of Talmud that a migoy like this doesn't work. It doesn't work when the question is not whether or not to believe the person, but whether or not the person made a mistake. In other words, if we're not, in a case where the claim is not that she lied, that the person lied, so a migoy wouldn't help. So I want to bring that case, but I just don't want to confuse. So if you want to take a risk and we'll go 5 minutes on a totally different topic. If you don't like, if you don't get it, it's fine. If you get it and it confuses you, it's fine. So we're hitting play. And in 5 minutes, if you don't like what I said, just do control delete, delete the whole thing and we'll go back to our current discussion. It's actually interesting because it's wartime. So one of the biggest problems in Jewish history and halacha was to determine whether somebody died. Why? Because if somebody goes away, someone traveled to across the country or across the world, and then there's a war breaks out, and nobody knows what happened to that person. His wife cannot remarry. So throughout history, one of the biggest problems, it still is a big problem today, but nothing compared to what it was, where you have a person whose husband is gone, and you want to release them for marriage so they can marry somebody else. And there's so much discussion about it. The rabbis go out of their way to almost break all laws of testimony to accept any form of testimony that somebody died, even if it's one witness, even if the witness is partial, not impartial. We go out of our way to accept as much as we can. because of this issue, we have to release the woman being married. So here's in the case. A woman shows up and she says, my husband dies. Where's your witnesses? No witnesses. I just came from Australia. No witnesses. Where is there? Do you have a death certificate? No death certificate. I come from the Wild West. There's no government. What's the law? Usually, it wouldn't occur to us to allow, to accept testimony from one person who is partial, who stands to gain, right? Here, there's no problem. Woman says, you say what? You say what? Your husband died? Quote unquote, died on his bed? He died? No problem. You can go home. And no problem. We believe you. Now what happens is, if a woman comes and says, oh, I'm coming from Kiev, and my husband died in the war. Oh, now the rabbis say, we can't help you. You cannot, that's not proof. Why? Because when it comes to war has built in confusion. We don't think the woman's lying. We just think that she assumes her husband died in the war, but she doesn't know. So therefore, we can't believe her. Now we can't believe her. That's not proof that her husband died. What happens? You follow? I don't know if you don't have to agree, just have to follow. What happens if the woman comes from Kiev and she says, my husband died, happened to be a war, but my husband died in his bed, didn't die in battle, he just died. Then we say, oh, we believe you. Because that's the law. The law is you believe a woman who said her husband dies. She says he died in war. Nobody knows what happened in war. So that's the basic building blocks of the question here. So now the Talmud says, 1 second, how come you don't make a migoy? You don't say, if a woman comes and says, my husband died in war, believe her, because if she's lying, she could have said, my husband died on his bed, and you would believe her then. The answer is, migoy doesn't work here, because we don't think, when she said, my husband died in war, we don't think she's lying. We think she thinks he died in war. The whole battalion was killed. Doesn't mean he was killed. Maybe he got away. So a migoy doesn't work when Tosafos proves in that case that a migoy doesn't work when the question is not whether or not we believe the person, whether the person is trustworthy, but the question is the person making a mistake? And if we suspect the person is making a mistake, the migoy doesn't help, because all a migoy does is tells me that you're trustworthy. But migoy doesn't tell me you're not making a mistake. Back to our case, says Tosafos, what are you telling me? You're telling me that because there were no witnesses, that the homeowner hired the laborer. So we believe the homeowner when he said he paid me, because if the homeowner was lying, he could have said he never hired me. So we believe you that you're trustworthy. Says Tosafos, I have no idea what you're talking about. This is not a question of whether we believe you're trustworthy. The Talmud itself said the question was that we think that you're so busy and overwhelmed with your business that you forgot. You made a mistake. So the fact that you're trustworthy doesn't make you any more believable. If you need proof, go look at the case with the woman. That migoy doesn't work when the question is not a question of believability, but a question of mistake. So it's a wonderful question, very powerful question. Yes, go ahead.
Well, is there a better probability that the employer knows the law and employee doesn't? And then the employer may have made a mistake or may have lied because he knows the law.
Okay. Forget about knowing the law, but Tosafos is going to go to your points. Again, I like the answer. I don't think it's as good as the question. I like the answer, but Tosafos is going to go to your point. And you see how Tosafos is going to retell the story with the same facts of the Talmud, because the Talmud says we think you're making a mistake, and yet talk about the fact we're going to introduce the question of believability, of whether or not you're lying, even though the Talmud says the question is whether you made a mistake. We're going to mix the two together, come out of Chalent, and straighten everything out. What does Tosafos say? Tosafos says the story is like this. Vicky is the employer. Okay, I don't want to say Vicky because I'm going to think maybe you lying. Yankel is the employer. Yankel says he paid me. That's a firm claim. Yankel says he paid me. So the way Tosafos learns the Talmud changes it a little bit, just a little bit, not too much. He says like this: Yankel claims that he paid me. That's a claim of certainty. So the way Tosafos is rereading the Talmud, if the owner claims with the certainty that he paid me, we have to believe the owner, because the owner has the money. The burden of proof is upon the other person. The problem is, says the way Tosafos is rereading the Talmud, when the owner says, when the employer, when Yankel says he paid me, we don't think he paid me. We think he doesn't remember whether he paid me. If he says, I don't know, everyone would say he has to pay. But he has some doubt. He's got a whole business to run. So when he says, somebody comes into his office and says, pay me, he doesn't remember he paid, but he doesn't remember that he didn't pay. I'm sorry, he doesn't remember that he didn't pay, but he doesn't remember he paid. He's too busy. If he's too busy, right? If he's too busy, he doesn't remember anything. So he's in doubt. He doesn't want to say he's in doubt. So he says, I know for sure I paid you. Says the Talmud, we don't believe you. We don't believe you. We believe the employee. Why? Because the employee's waiting for the money and you're too busy. Says Tosafos, 1 second. What happens if we know for sure that this person does stand up, only says the truth? Because if he's lying, he would say that I never hired you because there are no witnesses. So there's a migoy. So now, when the employer says, when Yankel says, I paid you, we believe him that he's certain in his claim. So now the brilliance of Tosafos, I'll repeat it in a second, but what Tosafos just did, he took a piece of Talmud that doesn't mention believability. It just says that the owner forgets. And he took that same fact, he kept that in the story, he kept that in the mix, added a little spice, and switched it from just being about forgetting to being about forgetting plus believability. And therefore, the migoy would play out. So just to repeat, the standard case where there's no migoy, in other words, Yankel hires me with witnesses. He could not deny it. He could not deny that he hired me. I have a dispute with the owner. I have a dispute with the boss. I say I wasn't paid. I know for certain I wasn't paid. The boss says, I paid you. Says the Talmud, sorry, you don't know that. You don't really think you paid me. You don't know. You don't know. You say I paid you. You don't know what you're talking about. So believe the employee and believe the laborer. If we know that the employer is saying the truth, because if he doesn't say the truth, he could have said he never hired me. Then when he says, I know I paid you, we believe him that he paid me, because this is a guy that if he wasn't sure, he would say, I'm not sure. So it's actually very creative. I'm not saying this is the simple meaning of the Talmud, but it's a very creative way of reading the Talmud. But Tosafos has no choice because his question is so powerful. And his question is so powerful. Like, how are you talking to me about a migoy, which is about believability? If the Talmud says the question here is not about believability, the question is not who's lying, but the question is who made a mistake. And if you made a mistake, the issue is, in other words, you're so busy, you don't remember. So what's not a question of believability? So Tosafos keeps the element of mistake, you're not sure, but also introduces believability, puts the two together, and he says, look, he says, if you are somebody, if you don't have a migoy, we assume when you claim you didn't pay, we assume you mean I don't remember. When you claim you paid, we assume you mean you're not sure if you paid, which is another reason why we believe the laborer, because you, not only that we think you forgot, it's not only that we think that you forgot that you paid, we think you yourself are not even sure if you paid. You're just saying you're sure, but you're not sure because you're so busy. But if we have a mikoi, then we know that when you say you're a trustworthy person, when you say you think you paid, it's not that you're not sure, it's you remember paying. If you remember paying, we have to believe you because you're the owner, and the money is with you. The other person wants to extract, burden of proof is on the other person. So I think this is just a very creative question. Answer is even more creative, but it's a little hard to squeeze it into the Talmud, but that's why they get paid the big money. So this is the story in short. I hope it at least alerted my mind. I'm not sure if it was the Tosafos that made me sharp this morning or the coffee. One of the two. Two of them together certainly helps. So this has been fun. I'm happy we got a taste. Oh, it even rhymes. I'm happy we got a taste of Tosafos. Okay, that's today. That we got a little break, so we had to jump back in. Looking forward to next week, God willing. We'll do a little bit more of Talmud / Maimonides / commentary / whatever else comes up in the discussion.
Thank you.
Reuven.
Wonderful day, everybody. We'll see you in good health.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.